Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Let's get ready for Gnosis. Now, let's talk about some interesting subject matters. You know, the contradictoriness of society and what we know, which is really nothing. We have everything that's interpreted through a very tight little straw that everything is filtered through, based on really buffoonish academia that really is lost and not open to anything. If you have any kind of contradictory opinion, they step on you like a bug. So one of the things I want to cover is ancient Egypt. Were they really an advanced culture? Well, you know, at first impressions, you look at ancient Egypt and their amazing building abilities. Their arts and crafts. They were really, I mean, we just don't know how any of this was done. And I've seen the actual, I didn't go to Egypt, but I've seen many of their artifacts that were brought around, including large stones and everything else. And it's just amazing the kind of craftsmanship is there that we really can't do today. Like, we can't really do much of anything today when it really comes to any great empowerment. So it all the same thing to do with what has been created past these ancient societies. What have the major religions, including the Tibetans and the Buddhists and everybody, what have they really done? Well, not very much. I mean, when you look at their ancient structures, there certainly are some amazing buildings in India, particularly southern India, that has been ignored because there's nothing but pornographic images on most of the buildings. I guess we can figure why there's 1.5 billion people there. I mean, they had porno stuck in their face for thousands of years. But moving past that, but what has really been built? I mean, we look at particularly Christianity, and I mean, there really isn't any great structures. The Romans, who built most things as pagans, we can't really say they're Christians because that was the end of their empire when they got destroyed. That's kind of a message, huh? Of course, built amazing things that are in use today and still here, and in their very good shape that are thousands and thousands of years old. It's quite interesting. So you can see those in many places. Still, they have working aqueducts and other things that we could only dream of making something that well. So, but these are not really, I mean, they're amazing architectural and engineering feats, and the Romans were able to do that and also build a lot of aqueducts to build kind of factories run on water power, because they would turn things. So very interesting. But again, this is not really what we would consider high-tech stuff. It's very, very fantastic, low-level, but magnificent engineering. And it's the same thing that goes with Egypt. Well, what did Egypt ever do? Well, you know, it's a misnomer. I mean, Egypt has caught the attention because it sneaked into European fancy. And Napoleon was there. There was a big growth of how great Egypt was. And of course, Egypt is close to Europe. The Middle East is close to Europe. It's very close to Italy. This flows up through there. So the whole idea is that the Middle East and Europe are very, very close. So you can get there easily. And certainly it's hard to look at the pyramids or their other buildings and go, ho-hum. So these are just mind-boggling structures. But real society actually came from North America. You're talking about 20, 30,000 years ago, or maybe more. All those structures have now turned basically into dust, and there's very little of it left out there. There may be something underground. It's amazing how everything gets covered up. So, you know, things just don't waste away. They tend to get covered up under huge amounts of dirt. But it was North America and the Aztecs, another super advanced, or I should say, whomever those people were. I don't know if the Aztecs themselves or the Mayans, whatever. Well, they apparently were originally stated in their literature. They came from what would be considered Utah now. And they moved down to what I would guess would be much more fertile territory. Even though they would probably have to go through California, which is one of the most beautiful and fertile regions in the world. That is out there as well. But they moved down there, and there's this huge amount of history of that. Now, and basically they had the most advanced societies, and almost every square inch of Mexico and so many other Central and South American countries, every square foot, there are some major buildings in certain areas. through Chile, Peru, etc. This is an amazing culture that actually dwarfs the Egyptians. Quite dramatically, the kind of size of cities, how they did it, even the more primitive environments they had to build things. Now, the problem happened is because all their literature, and I don't believe all of it, but still hasn't come back to this day. I can't believe that there wasn't a huge amount of secret texts that were hidden in caves and other places when the raping, murdering, Spanish, Islamic trained people entered into Mexico. So the brutality of that happened to those to subdue those people was at supreme levels. But we also have to remember it wasn't 150 Spaniards with tacos underneath their arm that did this. A lot of what happened there was the fact that disease ravaged them as usual. It's usually the hidden story of all culture is that disease ravishes them, which is very interesting and something that never has been changed. We still don't have any ways of handling sickness whatsoever. We have very primitive stuff. We've come to a certain, we're at the same place we are with physics and science in general. We have ran through what you would consider an alley with a dead end, and we're going really fast. And gee, we've got this here. We see the alley. At the end of it, boom! You ran into a brick wall. And that's where we are right now. We have not really getting past anything for several reasons. I think one of the main reasons is corruption, of course. Corruption affects everything. So if someone dies in your family, if the earth has problems, if you got toxic, all of this is because of corruption, because it appears almost on every level that we have answers to everything that are ignored. It's all based on money, and we don't care about you, and you can. So there's a real problem with the way the human consciousness works. And is this natural, or has this been created? Why do we kill each other all the time for pretty much no reason? There's plenty of everything, but there's always the hoodlums out there that want to steal what you have because they don't want to work. And this is one of the bigger problems of society that I will address in other lectures. Things are pretty simple, but it's also people don't look at things in any proper way. They don't understand it. They're trained by complete idiots. You live in a urban fantasy. Everything you know is just nonsense. So I'm getting to the point I believe absolutely nothing. Maybe the earth is flat. Maybe water is dry. We've been so brainwashed that it really gets down to that. Of course, that's an extreme, but we do have to understand the fact that everything we know is nonsense. And it goes with these great societies. Now, the Egyptians have always been prey. As I said, it's pretty impossible to look at what they made, carved, what they built, without just your mouth hanging open. As I said, I've seen these personally in museums around the world. It's just unbelievable. A lot of it we can't reproduce. How did they do this with copper tools, copper's very soft. So you really, actually chipping out stone and stuff is very difficult. People then say, of course, because they found, and you got to remember the newer, I should say, Egyptian kingdoms are, they go down. They're not improving. We all think that we get better over time. I'm not entirely sure that's true. Certainly, a society doesn't necessarily get better. I'm not sure which philosopher it was. I think it was Nietzsche who said the fact that, civilization breeds cruelty. And I think that's true. I think it really does. I'm not sure. And most advanced societies, you look at the technologically advanced societies throughout history, if there is any, they all tend to be pretty evil and rotten. Kind of like Stephen King's book, The Stand. The good people were the pagans, and they had rocks and sticks, and the evil people had all the computers. So I tend to think that this is so true, and I think it distorts you living in a fake reality. Now, if you're a nerdy type person, if you're a Silicon Valley guy living in an office that is completely temperature controlled, you go from that environment to your temperature control. These are very nasty, rotten people. I know these people. I've met them. They look at you as a subhuman. So they are the smart ones. We control everything on our desktop, and we don't have to worry about it because you're not going to come into my controlled environment. And if you try and do that, what we're going to call, the football players that, used to hassle us, well, they're cops now, and they got guns, and they're going to shoot you. I'm in control. So a little bit of note there. So that people, again, I don't look at it that way. Well, you should. So, and I've seen these, and the wealthier someone gets, the more psychotic they are. Sociopathic, psychotic maniacs, all wealthy are. And you are a commodity. You're not a human. This, of course, is what happens when everything turns into a dollar bill. So the whole idea is that we look at so the really advanced society. Now, why were the actual Aztec Mayans, etc.? I mean, they built amazing things that don't get enough credit for. Why? Well, what happens is because of the first of all, as I said, all their, just about every, I think there's only one book that comes from the Aztec Mayans that survived. Everything else was destroyed. A lot of it, of course, was not carved in stone. It was carved in some sort of wood or something that could be destroyed. Now, the actual Spaniards went in there and burned everything, destroyed everything. That's what you do when you take a society over. What's interesting is the Aztecs did that to the Mayans. So it's not just Mr. White Man. I'm not sure you can call the Spanish white, considering they're Middle Easterners. That's where their culture was taken over by. It's just a fact. There's nothing negative about that. People that need to know where cultures come from, so you can talk like you know something. So the whole idea is that. But whatever, everything was burned. They murdered millions of those, tortured them horribly to death. And of course, this was all very Spanish. This was done to traumatize people. Look what will happen to you if you go against us. You just don't want to cut someone's head off. You want to peel their skin off, burn them alive, and all the other fun things you do. You know, like the special forces do today, trained by sea bees, the sea bees, the seals. Yeah, we learn in school how to torture. So the whole idea is that this is the kind of culture that goes on. This is nothing new. This is how this planet works. So if you don't understand how this planet works, well, you're not going to do very well here. So the bottom line is that everyone has to understand. So you had this culture, and of course, disease ravaged the huge population. No way. I don't care if you had machine guns back there. I don't care if you had a helicopter armed with weapons. You would never be able to conquer the numbers that the actual Aztecs had. So what conquered them was disease. And the big thing that always affects everything, it's not just the psychos that come here, these perverted weirdos with their crosses, it's the actual traders. The Aztecs were beat by their own people, who they wisely, I don't know if it's wisely, the typically cunning humans, and particularly the particular Europeans, cunningly bought the other tribes off to fight. So there's a whole bunch of things there. But getting back to the culture there, I mean, there's virtually all over Mexico and everything. You can't even throw a stone without digging up a new building. And most of these things are overgrown even to this day. And it goes through all. There's cities everywhere. Some of them are so ancient that these stones have worn down to nothing. But there was obviously a huge city there. So these were very, very advanced people. I'm not entirely sure that what has been proven is that there was communication between ancient Egypt and ancient South America. They found cocaine in Egyptian tombs. Now, who gave the information to whom? Now, the Egyptians seem to have a much more complicated building system. Building a pointy pyramid is much more difficult than a step pyramid, but they used the step pyramids more practically. After all, they were sacrificing tens of thousands of people, and of course that's where the bad reputation came from. But again, this was much later in their development. Of course, all of these cultures killed their own people to seize power, just like the Hawaiians did with King Kamehameha, which everybody wants to praise. Well, he came in and killed all the other tribes so he could take over. So I don't know if that's good or bad. Point is, when you have a one world government, you tend to have more corruption instead of less. So all of these things we need to understand of what the reality is going on there. So there may have been. So we don't know if the culture or technologies came from South America and went to Egypt or not. Again, the famous sailor and researcher Thor Heyerdahl built a reed boat and sailed it from Egypt to South America without problems, at least once. He messed with the design thinking he knew better, and that boat didn't make it. He then restored the original design, and it did well. So we know this. We also know with his famous Kon-Tiki voyage that he was able to go from, was that Peru, into Polynesia and everything else, and that it wasn't all that tough. And apparently people were really gutsy back then and weren't afraid of too much. So they were able to do it. So we know that there's a lot more traveling than people think there is. Now, we have to look at the Egyptian. Now, again, as the Egyptian dynasties started to get newer, coming more towards modern time, they got weaker and weaker. Now, what are the accomplishments? We don't really know what this giant, now the giant Aztec Mayan cultures, we're not sure what they did because everything was destroyed. They certainly built a lot of stuff, and we've got to assume that there was also some sort of higher level medical surgery, etc. Now, we know from Egypt, almost everything comes from ancient Egypt. You find something and you'll say, yeah, who did this first? The Egyptians. Who made beer? The Egyptians. Who baked bread? The Egyptians. You go on and on. Who did brain surgery? The Egyptians. So the whole idea, here we go again. I mean, everything can be traced back to this culture. So certainly they were very advanced to a certain level. Now, but they couldn't figure out steel. I mean, these are the contradictions. Apparently, they all had bad teeth because they ate a lot of wheat, but it was stoned ground wheat, and they couldn't figure out how to filter out the minor particles that were stone there, so their teeth were worn down. Or at least that's what the scientists say. Dummadamia, we figured it out. You know, if you use wheat with a stone wheel. So I don't know. Maybe they were eating too much candy. We don't really know. So the whole idea is, so there is a problem there. And we also look at the fact that the ultimate goal of any society is really what? What does society come down to when we push everything to the side? When we get away from nonsense of money, sex, and power, what is the ultimate power in life? What is it what you want, especially if you're successful? What do rich people really spend all their money on when it comes down to it? And that is long life. And they didn't achieve that. They tried to. Their entire culture was based on living long and transcending. Yet none of them really did. Now, it is interesting, and I keep telling people that certainly modern lifespans are not really overly special. Most of the pharaohs can be traced into, I believe, was it Ramsey? I'm not sure which one, so don't hold me to that, all you little red penner nerds out there. But I think it was Ramsey who lived to be 86, 89, somewhere in there. So, which is basically the average life expectancy now. So that's pretty interesting. And most people in times, as I've always said, this Benjamin Franklin, Daniel Boone, all lived to be in their mid to late 80s. So it wasn't the antibiotics we weren't invented. So the whole idea is that they probably lived on fairly bad diets and everything else. Well, we have to assume maybe they were pure, but we don't know, since they didn't have all the toxins in those days that they have now. But ultimately, your goal, because there ain't nothing after this. Well, there is, but what we're talking about is a physical reality. And the bottom line is the most horrible thing that is going on with the biggest plague to our society, if we want to really get down to the problems, is that once people really figure things out, and just even with myself here, I finally figured everything else of how the entire universe works. And while I was on that trail for many years, well, now I have it. But now I'm in my 60s, and this is going to limit the amount of time I have to achieve higher levels. Now, if I could have a double life, this was my middle age, and I was living to be 120, well, we would conquer all the problems out there. And I also think that we would be more interested in achieving things because we want to keep the planet better. We want things to be healthy. We want clean air. Because, we're going to be doing stuff for another 60 or 70 years. Or really, our lifespan should be 150. I think people... Now, I've heard other people, that's another story, but, say, oh, you'll be lazy, you won't do it. Oh, that's nonsense. It's amazing the corrupt and stupid reality that people look at. They even fight against living longer. Here we again get back to these brain viruses, which I believe are implanted, because none of it makes any sense, but everybody's a little bit stupid. Not a little bit stupid, a lot stupid. So all of this is what's going on. So the whole idea, if people were able to actually do this at a level and live longer, that we would be in much better position. Plain and simple. So ideally, if everybody lived to be 150, I think the world would dramatically change for the better. Things would be made better because you're going to be here a long time. People take care of something if they know they're going to own it for a long time. So their entire goal was to live long, and they didn't. The life expectancy, as it has been for the last probably 1,000 years, has been in your middle to late 80s. Now, people die younger because of a whole number of reasons, but the point is that anybody, and as I said, I just mentioned relatively common people, Benjamin Franklin, Daniel Boone. Come on, give me modern science and medically, we're extending life. People used to live to only 30. Where? Where did they only live to be 30? The reason why people used to die young was virtually because of bacterial infection. So if you were chopping wood and you got a really deep cut or maybe hit your leg, well, you didn't die from blood loss or anything. You died from the infection, and antibiotics have stopped that. But apparently a lot of people were able to deal with that as well, like Daniel Boone. So we can just go on and on. I always look at that when I look at old figures or ancient people that weren't killed or something. How long did they live? Well, they're all living into their 80s. So the life expectancy based on all the poison crap we put in our system and garbage diets is a fraud. But what isn't? And again, these are historical facts. These are not my conclusions. Find out for yourself. So the whole idea is that these societies, so they were unable to do that because we do have records of all the pharaohs and when they died. And give or take years, whatever it is, none of them stated that they had been living forever. Now, Egyptian society was quite weird. It's an incestuous society. Everybody was interbred, meaning they weren't probably that healthy. But one of the things that people don't understand is that it's not just your body that's unhealthy. People say, oh, well, he's born with this or that. This happens even to this day, particularly in, is it Hasidic Jews, which only interbred? Well, they have a lot of... and I knew this because there was a guy in where I used to live in Palm Springs, used to run a charity for children and people that were deformed and so forth who were of Jewish reality. And the fact is they had a lot of, because of interbreeding, they had a lot of retarded and deformed people, etc. So you got to remember that it doesn't just affect your body. You just don't have a weird hand or leg or whatever. You have health problems. You have mind problems. It's amazing how people don't look at the fact that, if you're riddled with a disease, you're not thinking properly. We just want to ignore that. Well, your brain is perfectly fine, right? Well, of course not. This is my problem with Mr. Black Hole Boy, who was riddled with a horrible disease. And we expected this guy to be thinking properly. Really? Oh, that's insanity. So we can't go around basing people. If you have a really physical problem, you're not going to be thinking correctly. Maybe you think okay, but you're not going to be able to reach higher states of consciousness because you're too involved in the physical, which is destroying you mentally. So all of this we have to fully understand. So when we look at these societies, they had that, so we don't know what they were doing. They were possessed on ascending and living forever and they finally agreed to was the fact that they could physically not do this. So what they wanted to do was build tombs where they could then be turned into light bodies and then go up to their original planet where apparently they got all their information from. So it was all based on them leaving the physical world here and going to another reality where they could live forever. Almost heaven-like to a certain degree because they weren't taking their physical body. So, which is very interesting. And they agreed they really couldn't do that. Now, what was the rest of society? Well, to a certain extent, obviously, they had a society supported by, obviously, a dictatorship who could get things done. But, when we look at all the buildings in ancient Egypt, most of them are religious buildings, and they have priests for the different gods and everything else. Now, I guess this in itself could be something that gives some benefits if those gods actually did something directly. So it is interesting to do that, and as I said, almost everything comes from there. One of the things they really lacked, even though I think they developed the chariot and the wheel properly, I'm not sure, and they developed how to shoot bow and arrows from their chariots and so forth to maintain their society, because in the end, you have to come out and fight, and there were periods of time where the Egyptians didn't have any conflicts, and they were able to really build their society great. Other times they weren't, and the Egyptian community became under great attack and were almost conquered, and they had to fight back. Other times they were actually conquered. Which, here we go back to yet again. Now, they had all these beautiful monuments, they know how to do things, but apparently they couldn't figure out how to make a particle beam weapon from their pyramids or some other thing so they could zap their enemies. No, they went out there with copper swords on their chariots and did fight effectively to a certain degree, but ultimately when they faced a smarter, more superior military, such as the Romans and the Greeks, well, they lost. And they were occupied for, I still haven't got the exact figure, but I heard somewhere that they've been occupied for 700 years by the Greeks. And of course, the Greeks took all the information they learned in Egypt, brought it into Greece. They were able to build some amazing structures. This was turned over to the Romans, who took everything the Greeks had and then brought into Western society. But yeah, there is a uniqueness to the thought of the Greeks and the Romans, which were able to do things as well. So this was turned into engineering understanding, which was then brought into Europe, while the decay of Egypt went down because of newer and newer societies, and of course the takeover of more and more religions that enslaved them. Because, even to this day, Islam has tried to burn down the Egyptian museum. They don't want to give any credit to the old Egyptians. After all, they're pagans, they're scum. Sound familiar? They're born again. So the born-agains in the Middle East wanted to go and destroy everything. What's new? So they brought the societies down. So we've actually went down the evolution in society in terms of the structure of things, have went down and down because that's what happened particularly at certain times as these barbarians, these scumbuckets from Genghis Khan who burnt through all the scrolls in Baghdad, which was kept there. By, of course, the Islam at least valued this to some degree, took all those and threw them in the river there. People said that they could see the river, it looked like you could walk across it. So this is what Genghis Khan did. This is what Attila the Hun, they've taken all civilization and done. And of course, this was also done by a large extent by the Vikings who attacked monasteries and upset that system, really putting Europe back probably by 100 years or so because they didn't have stable institutions that were doing everything. And as much as you don't like the church or not, these were organized groups of people who were doing certain stuff that nobody else had the money to pay for. Scribes, copying books, making things, brewing beer, making wine. So all the stuff that the monkeys did and wrote all this down was very important to the evolution of society. Certainly raiders that came in and murdered everybody. So there's the usual disconnect here. Now, one of the problems is you got to, just as we do in modern society, is that you've got to put a lot of money into your military because you're going to have these really disgusting people come in here and steal everything you have. And generally, they're subhuman species. They are people that just have learned how to murder and maybe have even perfected a weapon like the Mongols did with their compound bows and were able to devastate even better armies like the Romans at least once. The Romans built their own bows, came back and got them good. So the whole idea is that people can criticize these different, but if you're not a warrior society into domination and killing, you will not survive. That is the human. There's never been a pacifist society that's ever survived. Plain and simple, it doesn't exist. Unless you're some goofball cult that lives inside a country that protects you, like we have with the Amish and other freaks. So the whole idea is we do have to understand this reality there. So you cannot be a society based in technology, hierarchy, and religion alone. That has to be the holy book in one arm and the sword in the other. That's how the world works. We all need to understand that. But to what level, and of course, do you go? What happens is you build a society based on that, and all your money goes there, as it goes with particularly the United States, which all it is a military country. Everything the United States does is based on the military, who funds everything, who supports everybody, period. That's how it is. So when you get into that, you get into a spiral of corruption and evil that never ends. And then, of course, you have to start wars all the time so you can justify your salaries and keep trillions of dollars going to you. So this is how these things work in terms of that. So what do we look at in the Egyptians? So obviously they were master builders. They were involved in scientific things. They were able to figure out things that take complicated calculators today to figure out. They made everything very precise. Well, so did the Aztecs and Mayans. So, and as he said, their culture went down to jump back to that. Went down because of the fact of their decadence, where they then started sacrificing people. And it seems to be something got into their culture in that entire area. And I believe this was probably hostile reptilian aliens who conveniently look very much like Quetzalcoatl and other things. And I think they were instructed to do this to eliminate their society, or maybe they were feeding some sort of demonic energy to these aliens who lived off of blood or the pain or suffering or whatever it was. They decided to. Who taught them to do that? Why? They also were highly overpopulated, and this was a way of keeping the population down. So there were some practical things here of how you would do it. And all this sacrifice stuff is very interesting, but we just don't know that much about it. But of course, once the burned all their important texts, and you got to remember the Aztecs and Mayans, a lot of them said they didn't build any of that stuff, that they inherited it from an older, greater culture. Well, were these the original inhabitants, meaning they built everything without any knowledge, or were these Egyptians that came down there and built it? The mythology says that white men in wooden boats came there to build things. Well, how is that weird? What white men? There basically wasn't any great builders that were any, quote, white people. As far as I know, certainly they didn't build any of that anywhere else there, unless they interpreted white being more of these semi-white-looking people that come from the Middle East, like Iraq and Iran, which are basically Aryans. That's where Germans come from. They're Arabs. So the whole idea, or we should say Iranians. They don't like to be called Arabs. Persians. So the whole idea, and they have a very particular, strange racial look to them. White people are Celts, the original Greeks and Italians. Well, these are all the original white people to get a little bit of lecture in there. That's a whole other thing I've talked about already. But the whole idea is that what is all that? What is going on there with that in terms of the society? So we don't know which was built. So again, the Egyptians didn't claim somebody else did it. They claim they built it. We know they built it, or at least prior dynasties built it. They tried to copy some of the older dynasties using very primitive methods of slamming stones against other stones and so forth. And we have semi-made things in this particular way. It's almost comical to think that they were doing all these things with copper tools and banging one rock against another to slowly chip away. This is what has been shown in excavation, half-made things. But all of this doesn't seem to make any sense, and it's very complicated to do what they did. But maybe, the point is they knew how to do it. Were they advanced? Well, they were okay militarily and were able to survive for many hundreds of years. When they finally faced a very superior enemy coming from Europe who was practiced, armed, and skilled, they didn't do too well. And as he said, they lost that. So the Romans took them over, everything went with it, etc. So that was all part of the reality that has to be faced. But ultimately, what's interesting is even what we call distilling today, making alcohol, was gotten by a Dutchman from an old Egyptian text that showed people how to distill for making perfumes, which were the base. Alcohol is the base of most perfumes. Where did that come from? Well, it didn't come from the Dutch guy. He just took the recipe or the technology found in an old book that was written by, can I have the envelope? The Egyptians. So here we go again. So obviously this is a very genius group of people, very advanced in one way and very not advanced. And it's very similar to even the society we have today based in the Western world. We have a lot of advances, but we really haven't achieved what we have to. And some of this, or of course almost all of it now. And we have to wonder, is this society any different than ancient Egypt? There is a genius to modern society with our new technologies, our combination of information, which is really what's evolved this planet. Now that we're all connected by the internet, if you're stupid, you've chosen to be stupid. You're lazy. So stop drinking, smoking, and watching porn and start reading something of value. So the whole idea is that this is what people are involved with now. So there's a genius to it, but there's a disconnect. So why are we not? We have not solved a single one of our major problems. Was ancient Egypt just as correct? Well, we do have the answers, and we have all the answers to all of our major problems: how to take care of everything, how to purify the earth, get rid of the toxins, how to filter every stuff out, how to get rid of it. There are ways of doing this. How to get rid of nuclear waste. They've had a method of doing this for over 20 years that is non-toxic. So, of course, you don't hear about that. Why don't they use it? Well, remember, we have $40 billion to give to the Adolf Hitler Brigade in Ukraine. So the whole idea is that's where the money goes. What is that? Well, that's corruption. So we get involved with all these things, and we run into serious problems doing that. So it gets down to the fact that really we have solved all of our problems. We just refuse to take the solutions and apply them because of certain bullies that want to dominate and benefit from old, stupid, toxic technologies. And they're more than easy enough to get Uncle Joe to do it. Your neighbors, the guy around the corner, your mayor, your assemblyman. Stop blaming everybody else. It's in your town. The rotten filth and stink is your next door neighbor. So the whole idea is we all need to understand that. So what happened there? So what's interesting is that, of course, we think they should have, metal computers and electromagnetic devices. That's pretty primitive stuff, and there's a problem to a lot of that stuff. Meaning the fact is that, if you're going to have electromagnetic energy, you're going to have to generate it somehow. Now, again, you would think since pyramids are giant generators and can be used in lots of ways, certainly these could have been, and some people even theorize that the pyramids were generators of some sort. So when we look at all that stuff, we need to fully understand that fact of what's going on there. And we got to understand, well, was ancient Egypt any less corrupt than we are today? I think not. We think that there's not corruption and dictatorships like Russia, Mao Zedong, Communist China. These are supposed to eliminate, because there's no money involved, that there's no corruption there. Yet, there's no difference between capitalism and communism as we know it today in terms of the level of corruption. So both are stinking, rotten, corrupt countries that never really achieve anything except off of the torture of their citizens for the benefit of a few. So it doesn't really matter what they name it, that's what they do. The whole idea of Marxism and communism was supposed to change that, but Russian communism and Maoism is not true communism. They have a ruling class who are super wealthy. That's not communism. They're not passing down everything down. And, the Chinese have found out that, if you want people to work, well, you have to reward them. So while they don't have nuts free thought, they have free thought to make money, and they encourage that. So we have to look at all that stuff, that there's no difference, of all these societies. So don't get tricked into that as well. So here we are as a very advanced society, and we could say the same thing to a large extent. Now, I don't know how ancient Egypt's or the Mayan social programs were. I don't know if poor people died in the street. From what I understand, that wasn't the case. They kind of took care of people, but I'm not sure how much they helped them. So I'm not sure what the real records are on that. What's interesting is a new document surfaced in Egypt, where there was a letter found from the Empire of in Africa. What is that country there? Oh, yeah, Ethiopia is how the Shmayantists, the Dumadamia people claim that was the empire writing to the Egyptians. And they stated that, yes, you have a superior army to us. You could come here and kill us all. But we are much more superior with our wizards. Our wizards could destroy you in a second. Now, this was their way of defending themselves against possible aggression by the ancient Egyptians of conquering into Africa. And of course, North Africa and Egypt is its own unique group of people and even racial class. They are not in any way blacks or Negroids. They are Caucasian, I don't know if you call it Caucasian, they're Mediterraneans, whatever that is. So they're kind of a mix of people there. So they certainly, as we see from all the Egyptians, while they did have blacks in there as slaves and other things, and a lot of statues have been painted black, well, this has really been done to kind of mess up history. That's just not the case, and there's nothing to be racist about that. Grow up, that's history. So Ethiopians wrote to that. And I'm assuming this was this was kind of a schoolyard braggadocio where you're going out there and stating how tough you are. So don't leave me alone when you're basically weak. So they were basically weak, and they stated that. So they said that they could destroy the Egyptian culture with their magicians when they want to. So, and of course it went back and forth as kids on a school ground. But I thought that was a very interesting document. They talk about magical rituals and magic in general. And this is all very, very interesting. So we must look at things in the way that they were actually offered there. So as things pop up, we get a clearer picture of things. And of course, this was a very successful society, Egypt in general. And so many other societies, including the Mayans and the Aztecs, etc. And what did they do? Well, they were magical societies. They were alternative texts. You could say they were radionic experts. All the successful people, all the successful societies were the alternative, basically magical societies. When people adopted traditional religions, they all fell. They failed horribly. Look at the Romans, who went into horrible decadence. And basically, the Romans and the Greeks never were conquered by anybody. They conquered themselves through constant civil wars. Every Roman general came back, conquered Italy after he conquered lands, appointing himself head poobah. Greece was not a country. It was the Athenians and the Spartans and the left bank Slavs and the cheetah bean monkeys. And all of these people got together, and then what did they do? They fought each other. So instead of working together and pushing out, that's what they did. The people who were more organized, like Persians and other people, went around in groups and took over lots of stuff, or anybody who got organized together and used. The Romans did this to a large extent when they were conquering land. We go on and on. Certainly Genghis Khan did this, etc. So they worked together as a military unit. But of course, they killed Genghis Khan, the first thing he did was kill all his people in his area, including all their people, the Chinese, their own culture. That happens to everybody. So this is how you first have to conquer the people around them, get them